started. All right, Council, I will call the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee to order for Monday, March 29th. Today, we acknowledge that Collingwood is located on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. I will look for the adoption of the agenda, and the resolution is that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for March 29, 2021 be adopted as presented. Are there any additions or omissions, Council? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Madigan and the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Any declarations of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof today? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we progress, let me know. Consent agenda, item 4, that the general consent agenda, having been given due consideration by the Standing Committee, be received. And further, that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. Item 4.1, Municipal Finance Officers Association of Ontario, timelines extended under OREG 588-17. And that is the only item on the consent agenda. So can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Doherty. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Is there any interest in pulling the one item on the agenda, consent agenda today, Council? No. That will take us then to item 5.1, which is staff reports. And we have 5.1 T 2021-2 2020 statement of remuneration paid to council and appointed board members. And I think we have a quick presentation on that. And welcome, Treasurer Quinlan, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a presentation actually for this particular document, but what I can share is that this is a statutory requirement that the Treasurer must do each year. Prior to March 31st, we are to give members of council information to the amounts that they've been paid or used in terms of training and development throughout the year. With respect to this year, not many changes other than I would say in comparison to 2019, it has decreased, and largely due to the pandemic and not necessarily being able to have the same types of seminars and courses and the type of travel that would normally show up on this report. So I don't think I can add really anything else that really further explains it, but I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Monica. Council, any questions, comments? Seeing none, I will look for a mover and a seconder, please. Oh, I better read the recommendation. And the recommendation is that staff report T 2021-2 2020 statement of remuneration paid to council and appointed board members be received, and that the 2020 statement of remuneration paid to council and appointed board members be received for information. Get a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Madigan, Councillor McLeod. I don't think there's any questions or comments, so I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Which brings us to item 5.2, T 2021-3 asset sale proceeds. And I will, go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
Seeing as we have one councillor who I think has provided regrets for the entire meeting and another one who is a few minutes late, I wonder if we might, and this is a fairly important thing to discuss in a robust manner, I think, and I withdraw my comments. I just saw her. Never mind.
Okay, I'm here, sorry.
Welcome, Councillor Hamlin. And we are at 5.2, which is the asset sale proceeds report, and we are just starting that. And Councillor McLeod is right. We have regrets from Councillor Comey today, and now we have a full contingent of council members who will be available for this. So with that being said, I will pass it to Treasurer Quinlan, I think, to take us through the report.
Thank you again, Your Worship. I'm going to provide a general overview of the report. I know it's quite lengthy, and it includes a lot of information, so I'm going to do my very best to highlight what I think is important to both council and members of the public. I do need to start off by sharing that I am a member of the Hospital Foundation Board. So although I will speak to the technical details of that piece of the recommendation, any further clarification or questions, I'm going to refer to the CAO. So to begin, I'm actually going to start at the end with the recommendations and then kind of work my way through the evaluation criteria and the different options, and then of course the background financial details that we've provided. But with respect to the recommendations, what I like about them most is that I feel like they are very well aligned with what the public recommendations were with respect to the results of the engagement survey. I also think they're very well aligned with Council's community-based strategic plan. Additionally, I think my thoughts are that they address a wide range of the options that were previously presented, to Council, and allow us to address many different aspects in the community. I feel like, for example, the servicing of Heritage Drive, or what is known as the SPIT, provides a tangible legacy, something that's very lasting and meaningful, and in that it's a critical starting point for many stages of the waterfront master plan. And in contrast, I feel like many of the other recommendations address the financial sustainability aspect as well. Finally, the last recommendation with respect to the legacy fund, I think, allows members of the public and council to review the many projects that we are awaiting, including the asset management plan, the results of the terminals RFP, and then also the art and culture needs assessment that's currently out there. And it still ensures that these funds continue to work for us in a I think, a moderate investment program that will help provide lots of opportunity in the future as well. I think you can see the decision criteria is laid out and how we devise the scoring system, and it's provided on page 41 and 42 of your agenda package. And they include first, whether the project or option that was provided is a legacy or that it's meaningful to the community. We wanted to make sure that it also provided the greatest amount of benefit to the greatest number of residents. We wanted to ensure that the cost actually of the project or the option fit within the funding envelope, and in some ways allowed us to do multiple projects or address multiple different aspects. We wanted to assign projects where other funding may not be readily available, meaning additional grant programs or things like that. We also looked at the timing of each option or project, and we wanted to ensure that there were appropriate funds available to take advantage of opportunities that may present themselves from time to time. And finally, the most important aspect, I think, is that it aligns with the community-based strategic plan. And note that under this criteria, there was the availability for up to 5 points if it applied to more than one of the 5 pillars of this plan. So I'm going to walk through how each option fared through the scoring matrix and also highlight where they may or may not have fallen within terms of the public responses in the engagement survey. So the first option we reviewed was debt repayment, and it was the highest ranked option out of the 11 provided to the public. We do address a portion of this through the recommendation by repaying those internally financed loans of just over $1 million. But with respect to the overall debt, and I think we get into it later on in the report, I think it's important to recognize that based on that information, the debt servicing cost of the town is actually quite healthy at less than 9%. Again, that excludes the debt that EPCOR would be responsible for. Additionally, with respect to our annual repayment limit, we still have quite a bit of room remaining. And finally, it's extremely costly to extinguish the current debentures we have with Infrastructure Ontario, especially given the interest rate environment today, because of course, those debentures have been sold out as bonds by IO, and if we did want to extinguish them, they would have to work to go out in the current environment and try and replenish that amount. So it would be very difficult and very expensive for us to do that. We do address a portion of it, as I said, through the internally financed loans, but the option itself scored 5 out of 10, so 50% of our scoring matrix as well. The second option that we looked at was the funding for terminals. And for the purposes of this report, I did combine the terminal redevelopment and the servicing for Heritage Drive, since it's basically a requirement with respect to redeveloping that location. From a public standpoint, this was number 2, and it scored 2 out of 11, I should say, and it scored 6 out of 10 in our decision matrix again. As noted earlier, the servicing aligns very well with the waterfront master plan and is basically the starting point for us to move beyond any other projects within that plan. It aligns well with the community-based strategic plan, which of course includes features of the waterfront master plan as well. And with respect to the terminals piece of this option, because we're waiting the results on the RFP that's still out in the public, I think it's important that the legacy fund that we recommend as part of the final option in this report also allows us to have some funds there in the future. So the next option was to establish reserve funds. And when I look at reserve funds, I'm including the 4 or 5 that were put out to the public, which are the Waterfront Master Plan, the Hospital Reserve Fund, the Working Capital Reserve Fund, and then the Life Cycle Asset Management Fund as well. And I'll go through them in a little bit more detail on their own, but I will say that with respect to this piece of the staff report, I also did some analysis on the adequacy of each reserve fund, and you can see that later on in the report. And I think one of the most important pieces of that information is that although originally when I calculated the total amount of underfunded reserves, it didn't include the 2.5 million that council deliberated as part of their 2021 budget. So when we add that to the overall calculations, in fact, we are within the adequacy that the 2017 reserve policy states. So I think that was a really great decision, and it's included in the analysis here as well. When I look at the Waterfront Master Plan Reserve Fund, we do recommend that we add 885,000 to this reserve, which would mean that reserve increases to about $3 million. And I believe that would allow us to proceed with the plan in a meaningful way to address some great projects that are included in that plan. And of course, it aligns really well with the community-based strategic plan. And this one scored 6 out of 10 in our decision criteria, but it was number 4 in terms of the public responses. The next one is the Hospital Reserve Fund. Again, it made its way into the recommendation, largely because we felt that there was a strong portion of legacy included in this. We also felt that it did serve a large amount of the residents and the community. And again, it aligned well with the community-based strategic plan. And I'm sorry, I made a mistake. This one scored 4th in the public responses, while the Waterfront Master Plan scored 3rd. And overall, with the hospital, it did score 5 out of 10. And we feel like, again, that this would be a fund that we would invest so that over the next several years until the hospital actually required the funding, that it could grow into something even larger than it is today. The third fund we looked at was the Working Capital Reserve Fund. As council is aware, this fund was used to support or to fund the judicial inquiry in some way. So we thought it was important to look at it. It was also included in the public engagement survey, albeit it was at the lower end of the spectrum there. I think it was number 8. After council did add the 2.5 million through the 2021 budget, it is actually quite a bit healthier than it would have been. So we are recommending that we add an additional million, which once again puts us well within the adequacy range of our reserve and reserve fund policy. And overall, it scored 5.5 out of 10 in our decision matrix. So again, we feel it aligns quite well with the community-based strategic plan under sustainability. And finally, there's the Life Cycle Asset Management Reserve Fund. It scored quite low in the public responses, and I think also in the decision matrix. However, I still feel like it is an important aspect of financial sustainability. While we await the results of the asset management plan, I've asked that we include 500,000 to help support this fund. But I think once we have more information again, the legacy fund, if possible or if necessary, could help to address any future needs we see arise out of that report. So the next option we looked at was support for art and culture needs, and it was ranked 5th within the public engagement survey, and it scored quite well within our decision matrix at 5.5 out of 10. Again, though, we're awaiting results on the need study that's out there right now, and I look at the legacy fund as a source of funding that could help in the very near future once we do decide on, or once the needs assessment tells us what types of projects the community is really looking for. Additionally, the property acquisition recommendation that we made also helps with this process, because we don't really know what those needs assessments are going to come out as. And quite honestly, it may require some property acquisition at some point in time. So that leads me to the next option that we reviewed. So property acquisition funding is a big piece of the recommendation. And I think, to be honest, it addresses the future needs of the organization, including something that may come out of the asset management plan, future waterfront plan ideas or projects, maybe even the multi-use center at some point in time. And then again, the arts and culture needs. As we all know, land in this area is becoming very difficult to obtain. And I think it makes sense since it addresses so many of the needs we've laid out. It scored quite high within the decision matrix of 8.5 out of 10. And again, largely because we feel it addresses all these different aspects of the community-based strategic plan. And it's 7th amongst the public survey. So finally, the last option that we put forth in terms of the recommendation is the Collingwood Legacy Fund. And I think throughout the report, I tried to tie back and highlight the importance of the reviews that we're still waiting on. Again, I'll go back to the asset management plan, the art and culture needs study, and then the redevelopment of the grain terminals. But I think establishing a fund such as this will help council to be able to better address those projects that are coming, quite shortly in the future. I also feel that having these funds in a good investment will provide a greater benefit to the community, and it can do a lot of great things by being reinvested and making the money sort of work for us in the meantime. And this scored 8.5 out of 10 in our decision matrix. So I know the report contained a lot of information about our financial position, and I would say at this point, when I review the 3 main pieces of our finances, and again, recognizing that the 2020 amounts are estimates because we're not yet complete our audit. It will happen next week, but I looked at the debt and we talked about that earlier as well. And I feel like the debt servicing cost is quite healthy, it's in the low to moderate range when it comes to the way the province would rate us. And I think we have addressed it somewhat in paying off the internal loans as well. From a reserve standpoint, again, throughout the report, we talk about the adequacy of certain reserve funds. Overall, we're within the range of what would be considered adequate based on that policy. And adding these additional funds will definitely help that as well. And finally, with respect to cash and investments, I think overall the town is very cash positive at this point. And once a lot of the results of the next few studies come through, I would like to put together a long-term investment strategy. Of course, there are a few options that I've included in this report, but I think it makes sense to make the money work for us. As we all know, interest rates right now are quite low. So it is difficult to find those right targeted investments. However, there's lots of options, both through banks and as well as the one fund that I've shared in the report that can be, very safe and provide the greatest amount of return as possible. So I think I've addressed all the highlights, so I can open it up to questions or clarifications.
Thank you very much, Monica. And this is an SIC meeting. So before I go over to council, I will ask the clerk if there's anyone in our audience that would like to speak to this.
Certainly, Your Worship. We do have attendees to our meeting, and if they request to speak to this item, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen and we will unmute you. So again, if you wish to speak to the recommendations in the staff report before council considers or committee considers, please press the raise your hand feature. All right, at this time, there doesn't appear to be anybody wishing to comment on the staff report.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll read in the recommendation, then we'll get it on the floor, and then we can have council ask questions. And the recommendation is the staff report T21-3 asset sale proceeds be received, and the council authorizes staff to allocate the asset sale proceeds as follows. 1, transfer $4 million to the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund and begin the selection of a realtor to identify properties that meet the needs of the community-based strategic plan. 2, $3 million to the extension of municipal services and the enhancement of Heritage Drive, portion of phase 1 of the waterfront master plan. 3, transfer $1,024,540 to repay the outstanding amount remaining in the internal loans. 4, transfer $1 million to address the shortfall of the working capital reserve fund. 5, transfer $1 million to a reserve fund established for the proposed hospital redevelopment. 6, transfer $885,000 to address the shortfall of the waterfront master plan reserve fund and enable a significant waterfront project to proceed. 7, transfer $500,000 to address the shortfall of the life cycle replacement reserve fund. And 8, allocate the remainder, approximately $6.5 million, to the Collingwood Legacy Fund to invest and address future projects such as the terminals redevelopment, art and culture needs, and or asset management once feasibility studies are completed. And I get a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman. Council questions or comments? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And I would start by saying I would have to agree with Treasurer Quinlan. I think staff did an outstanding job on this report, and I really liked the layout and how it was done. I did circulate this afternoon a couple of amendments that I'd like to consider. I'm only going to talk about them, but you can ask me to put them on the floor whenever you think it's appropriate. But the first is, the hospital is a major project for us, and it's significant for a large number of people, but also for the region. But we're having trouble getting it moving, and I think that we need to show how serious we are and how much we recognize the changes it's going to take for us to facilitate it, that the province can see we understand and we are serious. And it's just another effort in continuing to show the province that we are working with our hospital and the other partners in the region to try and make this a reality. So the first amendment I have would be to increase the reserve fund for the hospital redevelopment to $2 million. And that would come out of the legacy funds as the last. And I'm not a real fan of slush funds per se, and the Collingwood legacy money at 6.5 million, now I've got it 5.5 million if I put another million to the hospital, is that we saw how quickly it was tempting to erode it and use it through the global pandemic and and getting it paid back. And so I think a more focused legacy fund, based on what I'm hearing from residents in this term, we're specifically hearing about greening and climate change and all of the advocacy we can do, or we've really got to start getting serious about putting that into all of our plans. The Collingwood Art and Culture legacy, which I heard Treasurer Quinlan speak to quite a bit, but really not focused. It could be in here if we needed it. It could be there if we needed it, but kind of depends on what else would erode it. So to actually have a focused amount in there would be great. And then coming out of a JI and all of the building problems that have come up with our Quonset hut type sprung buildings, it is going to be serious for us, looking forward to a multi-use facility fund that won't be operating at significant losses. So My amendment that I circulated would take the remainder of 5.5 million and take $1 million to greening, 1.5 million to the art and culture, and 3 million to a multi-use facility, because these are truly, I think, foundational legacies that our town is going to need going forward. And there's going to be quite adjustment given the pandemic in terms of how we do deliver sport and the room that it's going to take to do that. So that's my high view over what I would be proposing as amendments to this. But again, I think staff did an outstanding job, and I think the citizens and taxpayers should be very pleased with our financial position and how well those decisions we made under CAO John Brown got us to a place where we're almost to our goal of servicing debt only at 7% of the dollar in our financial statements. So that's my comments for now until you're ready for the amendment, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I think what we'll do is we'll sever out these items and vote on them individually. When we get to the Hospital Reserve Fund, Councillor Jeffrey, I'll look for an amendment. And then I think to address your last three suggestions, what we will do is vote on 6.5 legacy fund. And if that's defeated, then we'll go through to your recommendations on a one-by-one basis. And I won't look for a seconder right now. I'm just going to go around the horn here to see, get other comments before we start to canvass each of the individual items. So other comments, Council. Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I have sort of maybe a broad macro comment, and then I've got perhaps a more specific comment as it relates to the first bullet point. The broad macro comment would be one, I would echo the comments of Councillor Jeffrey in terms of the report that's been presented, the time and the thought and the rationale between what was presented in terms of the feedback from the public, sort of the general consensus, maybe things that have been said and done around the council table, taking that information and putting it into a report as it relates to where we may see the monies go for future opportunity. That said, I will make one general comment as it relates to the time that's lapsed and the events that have transpired between the public consultation. If I do the math correctly and I make an assumption and I base it on 24,000 residents, the uptick was about 3.17% of the population participated in this gathering of information. So it's not a huge number. And the reason I suggest or I state that is simply because although there are some numbers that sort of rise to the top, and I think that if we were all asked to say, what are the top 3 or 4 things that may come out of this prior to even going to the public, I think we probably had a good sense anyways. I think, based on the last election, the terminals was one that rose to the top during the campaign. But between the time of the gathering of information and today, I think the one issue that has really become paramount, not only in Collingwood, but in the region and across the country is the issue of housing, whether it be affordable or attainable, it doesn't matter. And it also doesn't matter whether it's our issue, a county issue, provincial or federal. So the one thing that I would maybe suggest, and I would like to dovetail it into my comment at bullet 1, is that when we are looking at opportunities in terms of investment for acquisition of land, that there be such a broad scope that perhaps if an opportunity as it relates to the Affordable Housing Task Force that's just coming together, identifies an opportunity, that the 4 million that's being put in place would have as much consideration for maybe that opportunity as it would be for maybe a future recreation facility or a legacy purchase for a public park or something of that nature. Because I do think that's the one issue since the polling was done in 2019 to today that really maybe has risen to the fore for a lot of people in terms of front and center. so that would be sort of my general comment, and then very specific to the first one. And I just want to make this sort of preface comment by stating that people are aware that I do have another professional hat, and that is in the form of a realtor. I'm not advocating one way or the other. What I'm suggesting is I'm not sure that we require those services. Maybe we do at this point. But when I've had discussions, I know with the CAO about land acquisition, I think what I'd really like to see first, before we go down that road, would be the hiring. And it could be a realtor that actually does perform the service, but it could be a number of other professions that do the same work. And that is really take a look at the built boundary of Collingwood, maybe lands adjacent to Collingwood, and identify what properties are available, what's available that's vacant, what's not available, what's maybe a brownfield that could be purchased where we could invest, but we could also maybe pitch that to upper tiers of government for additional funds, and then really get a better sense of the opportunities across the community. I think there's a large, there have been opportunities that have come and gone, but I can think of others that if you put a creative lens, if you put a different focus on what that opportunity or what that land could be used for, what someone is thinking about today versus what a future opportunity could be two different things. And therefore, having the expertise and the lens from a person or persons from maybe outside the community, could be somebody in the community, that could really look and dive deep and say, here is the available acreage within your community that is in the public, the private hands. And here are maybe all of the different things that you could be taking a look at. And I'd almost like to see that be the step one in some type of a report coming back to council before we move forward with any type of land acquisition down the four. Because I would hate to see, hate is not the right word. What I would not like to see is we simply allocate 4 million and then all of a sudden an opportunity becomes available and it's like, oh, we got to jump on that without knowing whether or not that really is the best and highest use of the funds to acquire land that really will facilitate the best opportunity to meet some of these other really good objectives. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hamlin, and then I've got Councillor McLeod and Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few comments. The first one, I guess I'll say to start, I did appreciate the staff report and the allocation of the funds that's been suggested. And I'm actually going to speak in support of it. Our community, we sold our airport and we sold our public utility. Particularly the public utility was throwing off funds that would, support generations, presumably. And so we have had a lot of talk about a legacy project to support those assets. Something that would last a lifetime, a generational project where we could say, oh, we sold our airport and our public utility, but look what we have. And I see the staff report as giving us that opportunity between 4 million for the land, 3 million for Heritage Drive, 0.9 million almost for a waterfront project, and another 6.5 for a legacy fund, giving us that opportunity to have $14 million if we wanted to put something, for example, at the waterfront, whatever it might be. We'd have a real chance of doing it and a real opportunity to say, here was our legacy. And I'm not saying it has to be at the waterfront. Honestly, I don't know what it should be. I appreciate what Treasurer Quinlan has said, that we're waiting still for the results of an RFP process. Hopefully a developer is going to come forward and say, I've got a great opportunity. This is how it's going to work. We want to partner with you or do it on our own. So we have to see the outcome of that. I know we're doing a feasibility study right now. A consultant's doing that. Do we need an arts and culture facility of some kind? Maybe we won't. I don't know. I guess we'll see. And I don't know what our asset plan is going to show. But I am speaking very much in favor of not parceling the funds into any smaller chunks right now, but giving us the opportunity to sit back and see where will be the biggest bang for our buck. I don't have the same fear that Councillor Jeffrey has, although I appreciate it, that a slush fund is easy to, you can eat away at the edges. I totally appreciate that fear. But I feel that our staff and our council are totally on top of what a legacy project means. And, we certainly didn't let a penny get away from us, even though we faced a once in a lifetime pandemic with, incredible problems that are, of course, still going on in our community. I also wanted to say, in terms of the land, I wanted to leave this thought for our staff and council that in some communities, when they needed more land, they created it by dumping into the lake in Lake Ontario. And I happened to grow up near the Scarborough Bluffs. So I watched with great interest through my childhood as they created more and more of Bluffers Park Marina, and all kinds of things happened down there from nothing. So I just wanted to leave that because, so many of us, of course, and probably all of us enjoy the lands where the terminals are, and we could probably easily, I'll just throw that out there, and I have no idea about price, but enjoy double the area out there and make our own land. I also wanted to leave this thought that it sounded like in the report that Heritage Drive improvements would be something that might be sooner than later. And my thought on that is that we should await our decisions that we'll make in response to the RFP for the terminals. Depending on if there is a proposal, let's say there is a proposal, perhaps there'd be a developer who has a certain width of road in mind or needs so much servicing or not so much servicing, or if no developer comes forward that we can work with, maybe, I'll just throw this out there, people hate to hear this, maybe we'll take the terminals down and so we'll have just more of a park and we need less servicing. Anyway, I just want to say I don't think, it'd be my suggestion at least, that we give some thought to when we proceed on improving Heritage Drive in conjunction with that RFP results. Also, I wanted to comment briefly on the survey, as Deputy Mayor Hull did. I know that it is difficult to get an idea of what our community is thinking if people don't call their councillors. We don't know. We've started, and good for us, the Engage Collingwood site. But I would appreciate if we could have some analysis when the results are brought forward to us of who exactly has responded, if that's available, and how many people have responded. Because it might be helpful. Like when I was looking at the results that was in the staff report today, I thought, gee, what if everybody what if all the results, the almost 800 people who responded were over the age of 65, just for argument's sake. And I looked at the census data for our community and I thought, gee, 85% of our population is 64 or younger. That was in the 2016 census, right? So if we knew that everybody over 65 were the ones who responded, maybe we, as counselors, would get out into the community and say, hey, families, what do you think? Just so we get more of a balanced look at these things. Lastly, well, maybe I have two more points. One on where to invest these funds. And I looked carefully at the attachments to the report about the funds that we could consider investing in, where you put in your principal, and then it's tied to an equity fund. And the example given was perhaps one that's tied to the bank stocks. And the principal is guaranteed, but at the end of the term, you sort of look and see where you are in terms of the index, and if it goes up, you get a certain percent of that. Anyway, I just wanted to share. I did that myself several years ago, and at the end of the term, I got back my principal. And I have to say, my whole thought on it was I lost 5 years of interest. So I know there are investment counselors out there who specialize in municipalities and nonprofits and churches, people who, little old ladies who maybe we should speak to, if I could just make that suggestion before we make a decision. Lastly, I was a little disappointed there was no recommendation on community foundations. I have come to know the one in Grey Bruce a bit through my involvement with the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. I don't see them as, an organization that makes decisions on infrastructure where council could just as well make decisions. It's more, it's aimed at social good, if I can put it that way. And I looked this morning at the one for Grey Bruce, just to give you an idea. I just want council to understand, in case this comes up again, that, here are some of the additional funds that were created over the last year. I won't give you the names of them, but one to support the operations of the museum, another one supporting education for palliative care training, another one for community well-being, one for the Conservation Authority, one for well-being and health of women and girls. Just, that was just in 2020. So, and I appreciate staff, I read carefully the report we had on community foundations when it came forward before, and I totally appreciated staff's struggle with who's going to man this. And it really shouldn't be the staff of the municipality, in my view. It should be, people from the community should really coming together and say, we want this. We have social goods we want, accomplish here. So I don't know. At this stage, I'm not going to make a suggestion to put more funds there, but I hope we will keep our minds open on that as we proceed into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Councillor McLeod.
Councillor Madigan also has his, and just in case you didn't see him, Mr. Mayor. Oh, and also Councillor Berman. So we'll have a whole circle. So I have a couple of questions. And number one, thank you very much for this report and for the thoughtfulness that you've put into it. And Treasurer Quinlan, I actually kind of feel like this is an excellent opportunity for you to just dive right in and swim around in the numbers. So, and it appears that you have taken that opportunity and are doing the backstroke and the side stroke and all the strokes. So good for you. I'm going to, I think, disagree, although with a little piece of it, and agree, I think, with the comments made by Councillor Jeffrey. I'm not interested in having a nebulous, unassigned chunk of money. I'm not saying that I'm married to any of the ideas that have come forward, but I am not interested in, we were given a task and I'd like to fulfill it. And by the time this term is over. And so I would like to have this money assigned and not somewhere off in the future. I don't want to be accused of kicking anything down the can down the, whatever that phrase is. I'm not interested in that. I feel like I was hired to make a decision and I want to make it. So that's what I have to say about that. But I do have a question for Treasurer Quinlan and regarding the $6.5 million that is suggested for the legacy fund, or perhaps funds, if we were to divvy them up, earmark them, whatever phraseology one wants to use, can we do that and still realize the same potential benefits as is delineated in the report? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Treasurer.
We could. I think. Depending on what those funds were allocated for, I think I would be very careful with how I decide to invest the amounts, just because, let's say, for example, a portion of it was very long-term and then some of it might be more medium or short-term. I just have to be careful with how we allocate it. But I think the short answer, without being too technical or complicated, is yes. Even though we might isolate them into different funds, I'm still going to invest in a basket full of whatever amounts we have available.
Fantastic, thank you. I have a couple more questions, and one of them is to pick up on what Councillor Hamlin had to say regarding Heritage Drive. And I am a massive proponent of doing something sooner rather than later, irrespective of what happens with the terminals. We need loos down there. We need fresh water down there. We need services down there for our boaters and for our runners and for our paddlers. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to scramble home because I'm not using those porta potties. Ugh. So I think we need to recognize that this is a very highly used area, and we need to embrace it and do whatever is possible. So my personal preference would be that 3 million per Heritage Drive be spent, that design work start, if not this afternoon, then perhaps tomorrow. I'd like to see that happen just as soon as possible. And I know we have capital stuff that's coming. I'm using some hyperbole here, but I think that it's important that we do this sooner rather than later. So that becomes the question: is how soon can we do something like that with the big list of stuff that we've got in front of us? Through you, Your Worship.
That's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that, but I could get back to you on that.
Okay. Sorry. Not to worry. Thank you. And the other, my other point that I'd like to make as well, further to Councillor Jeffrey's point and also to Deputy Mayor Hall's point, is within the land suggestion, the $4 million that we're thinking regarding land acquisition. Is there a way to allocate within that? To go back to my point, I'd like to see decisions made. And so if we want to say out of the 4 million, 2 million goes to one thing or another as council wills it, would we be open to doing that as well? And I'm not sure whether this goes to Treasurer Quinlan or to the CAO. I guess it's Quinlan's report. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Treasurer.
Monica?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think that's a little bit difficult. I mean, if members of council did decide that they wanted to split the fund, that's within your purview, I suppose, to do that. And again, if the funds were sitting there, I would look at it as a basket of, and I hate to use the word cash, but I'm going to use cash anyways, a basket of money available to us to invest. So regardless of where we may decide, or let me rephrase that, where members of council decide to put, specific taglines to say, $1 million is for specific to the waterfront master plan, for example, just as an example. Again, that I believe it would be in your purview to do so. And then if we wanted to invest it, until we actually spend it, I'm going to look at the basket of funding available to the town to do the investment strategy. Does that answer it?
It does. And this is my last one. And I appreciate it. I want to say that overall this report meets my personal views regarding finances. When a windfall comes in, I think one of the things that we recently have all as a society is we teach our kids, a third, right? So a third to debt, a third to savings, a third to spending. And I think this kind of is pretty roughly doing that, and I'm pleased. But just to go back to what you said, Treasurer Quinlan, just now regarding, so the 4 million and the 6.5 or maybe 4.5 or 5.5, depending on what we do, those things would stay, and the 3, I suppose, for Heritage Drive would stay together and continue making interest and so on until such time as we decide to spend them. However, the ones that would be transferred into those reserve funds would be transferred to those reserve funds and do their business over there.
For you, Your Worship. So I mean, essentially, even when they get transferred into a reserve fund, until they get spent, they will also accumulate interest. So for example, if we took all of the recommendations until we actually need the money, or and I'll refer to this as cash because I'm looking at from a cash flow management standpoint, we're going to invest as much as we can. And when I say as much as we can, it'll come out of the long-term investment strategy that we create. But regardless of where or how we allocate the funds. If the cash is available and we don't need it right away, we're going to invest in the best way we can for that particular reserve fund and or legacy fund, or however you want to describe it.
Thank you. That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. I don't have any specific questions, but I have a couple of comments which may lead to questions. But I'll start by saying that I generally was in support of the staff recommendations as they were laid out in this report, the allocation of the various bundles of funds. I had no issue with 6.5 million of the total 17 being allocated generally, but not specifically, in a couple of different legacy areas, including the terminals and arts and culture, because I know that we need to have flexibility when opportunities come forward to us from the province or from the feds or from both. And when funds are tightly allocated towards specific projects, we run the risk of missing out. So I had no concern about that. I hate to use the word open-ended, but non-specific allocation toward legacy projects. That said, I certainly understand Councillor Jeffrey's notion of more tightly allocating those funds, earmarking those funds, if you will, so that there is nothing left to question. I understand that point of view as well. And also Councillor McLeod alluded to the same orientation. That said, I'm not in support of the allocations that have been recommended in the amendment. I find in general that they are not aligned with the direction and the priorities of the residents of Collingwood as they indicated in the Engage Collingwood survey. After paying down debt, which our allocations here do a good job of doing, the second highest stated priority was the terminals. And in fact, if you add in the proportion of votes for the terminal redevelopment and on top of it, the servicing of those lands, it actually was the #1 priority of our residents who responded to the survey. So the way the allocation is laid out now, we are left with $0 for the terminals. And so whether the final recommendation from the RFP is that we proceed to repurpose those terminals in partnership with private sector interest or on some other basis, or whether in fact the RFP says that the highest and best use of those terminals is to blow them up. We are putting that significant investment on the backs of our taxpayers because it would have to come out of our tax bill. So this is a minimum of $5 to $10 million. And I'm just alluding to the cost of taking them down as opposed to refurbishing them and bringing them up to a usable state. If we have an interest, a private sector interest that comes forward with a proposal for the terminals, based on what we know to be the cost to bring them up to a usable condition, they will expect the municipality to have skin in the game. And we are leaving in this amended motion, 0 skin in the game. And this concerns me greatly. I'm very much opposed to leaving the terminals out of that, a portion of the 6.5 million allocation. The second issue that I have is the amount of funding that would be allocated toward hospital redevelopment fund. I was completely in support of the notion of allocating $1 million to the hospital. I agree with, or to the redevelopment fund, I should say. I agree with the assessment that we need to show both the province and the hospital itself that we are committed. However, by doubling our commitment, I think that we're asking an awful lot of our residents, given that this is a regional hospital. There are 4 other municipalities that will be served by this hospital, and I would like to see them make similar equal commitments to a longer term cash commitment to the ultimate redevelopment of the hospital. The next item that I was concerned about, and you may be surprised to hear me say this, but I actually was not in support of earmarking $1 million toward green initiatives. And I'll explain to you why. It is not because I am not committed to green initiatives on the part of this municipality, but greening is not a priority that we only undertake when we have a few extra bucks to throw at it. Greening is the lens against which every purchase, every renovation, every redevelopment, every new build has to be made. It should be coming out of our regular annual planning and our regular annual budgeting process. And that's all I'm going to say about that. That money may be better employed, in my view, to be allocated against, as an example, the terminals redevelopment. Sorry. I also was glad to hear Deputy Mayor Hull allude to the fact that he had been looking for and did not see any kind of an allocation against our newly created Attainable Housing Task Force and the resources that they may need as they move forward toward a recommendation. Land acquisition against such an initiative as that could go a very long way toward creating truly affordable housing, or at the very least, toward a hard and permanent emergency housing facility. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you much, Councillor Doherty. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Marissa Anderson. I want to thank everybody that went before me for being very concise and direct. I will try to do the same. I really like this report, 34 pages, which could have been something so much longer. And I can only imagine that the 2 professionals that we had write it and the probably 2+ months of work and direction that they followed from us went into this. I can really understand and appreciate what they were trying to do with the 6.5 million in the fund. I don't consider it a slush fund whatsoever. I'm going to vote wholeheartedly and to support the staff's recommendations. I think they put a lot of work into this. And I think rarely over the past 6 years have you ever heard me thank staff for doing the job. So I'm not going to start now, but I thought the report was amazing, concise, and very easily understandable by myself and the public that got to read it over the weekend. So thank you so much for letting me digest it over the 4 days that you spent probably 2+ months doing. I really appreciate it, and I'll be voting for it wholeheartedly as it sits right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madigan. Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I thought one of the benefits of going at the end was that most of your questions would be answered, but it's actually raised so many more. But I have a couple questions, just clarification, and then a couple comments. Through you to the treasurer, I wrote all your comments down, basket of funding and cash and the interest. So I get all that, it all goes into a fund until it's needed. With few exceptions, the types of funds that we're talking about here, can they also, if it's the will of council, I mean, we're repaying some, so that money can be moved around if need be in certain reserves? Sorry.
Go ahead. Treasurer?
Sorry. Is that the question, Councillor Berman? Sorry. Yes, yes, it can be, of course. Again, through the will of council, yes, that funding can move from one reserve fund to the other, albeit, you know, within the adequacy report, we have certain levels of funding that, you know, council now again, back in 2017, declared as, you know, adequate reserve balances for those particular funds, but definitely.
Okay, thanks. That's what I thought the answer was, because I've been using this sort of simplistic analogy that the reserve funds we're talking about are sort of the way, you know, your grandmother used to keep envelopes of cash in her drawer, and this 20 would go into the vacation fund and the Christmas presents and blah, blah, blah. But it's all still in there. So as opposed to cash in a drawer, it's all earning interest regardless of what label we put on it. And if we need a little bit of money out of one reserve, because we can do it, as you say, in most cases, because here we are, we're paying some of it with this. So I'm not, I didn't want to get into Councillor Jeffrey's amendments, but I think you've covered the fact that it doesn't really make that big of a deal if we're earmarking the whatever the amount is that's left at the end, because if, God forbid, we need it for something bad or we need it for some amazing opportunity, we do have the opportunity to juggle things around so we don't miss out, and we're still earning the same amount of interest regardless of what name we've put on the envelope. My second question, and through you, Mayor Saunderson, I don't know if it's to you, the CAO, or the treasurer, is let's be optimistic. When we build a new hospital, and let's say it's a $500 million build, can somebody tell me ballpark what the dollar value is that the Collingwood taxpayers would have to put in? I know there was equations I've heard over time about, you know, the province builds the building, but we have to buy a lot of the stuff in the interior. Does that question make sense? And can somebody help me with that?
I think you're asking about the local share.
Yes.
Councillor. Yes. So, and maybe that, well, I'll look first to the treasurer or the CAO, but I know Councillor Jeffrey would probably know that number based on the current proposal.
Through you, Your Worship, I can answer that too, but I think the original amounts were in the $90 to $100 million range. But I think that's still that amount.
And that's, I'm sorry, again, through you, that's local to Collingwood or to?
I would, sorry, through you, Your Worship, I wouldn't say it's necessarily defined as local, but that there will not be any provincial funding for. If that clarifies it a little bit better.
Okay, no, that's great. And I didn't really want to speak to that potential amendment other than to say there's a big amount of money that we're going to have to come up with when a new hospital is built here. This is just getting us $1 million closer to that eventual number. So I think that was it for my questions. I wanted to make a couple of comments because I don't want to get too caught up in, I mean, we've seen two extremes. Nobody better than Deputy Mayor Hull going back 8 years between ignoring what the public has to say or forgetting that you were elected to make the decisions and doing only what the public says. So I think we had, did somebody say there was something like 1,600 responses? Does that sound right to this? No? maybe I just totaled the numbers up wrong, but how much were the total responses to the survey on page 3 of 16 in the staff report? If somebody could help me out.
Sonia, so go ahead, CAO.
I have to look again because it's been a couple of months since I read it, but I remember 800 and something responses. But during the next few minutes, I could double check that report that the Treasurer Leonard put forward when we finish the survey.
No, that's good enough. Thank you. So I just thought of this a couple hours before our meeting. So I looked back on the use of the first half share of the Collis funds. There were 179 responses to that. So I think everybody should be pretty happy that we got the 800 responses we got. I think I'd like to think a lot of it is that people knew that we would listen as opposed to the 2013 council. The public responses on that one, people wanted the money to go to harbor enhancements, which we're dealing with today. Heritage Drive, decrease the debt, arts and culture support. Those things were all ignored. History shows that. There was a lot of questioning at that time as to why they even had public input. And I'm going to embarrass the deputy mayor by saying that I just found these quotes. To be honest and frank, I'm a little confused, said Hall, noting that based on the motions passed on August 27th, council had already elected to put the proceeds of the sale towards the rec facilities. To go out to the public and say that these are all options we can look at is misleading to the public. And we all know he was right at that time. And in a recorded vote, he was the only one that voted against using the asset sales from the first half sale towards the Sprung Domes. Now, I love the staff report. I think we've all echoed that. When I opened my agenda on my phone when it came out, I honestly thought, wow, like you guys have covered all the bases. I looked down at what the public has asked for, and you've covered it all. Now, debt repayment, terminals with extending services to the spit, establishing reserves for the hospital, for working capital, for life cycle, support of all arts and culture, property near the downtown, we've got property covered, and legacy fund. And no matter what we do with that third dollar value, all of it had legacy fund at the end of it. So I'm going to echo something Councillor Madigan said. You guys know what, I don't do I'd like to thank staff thing, but this was impressive. I feel really good for the people of Collingwood, regardless of how we end up dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And Deputy Mayor, I can't imagine what kind of deja vu you're having this time around, but I hope it's the good kind. So I won't speak to the amendments. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. And we will sever each item and go through them individually. I guess by way of preliminary comments, and there's been some excellent discussion around the table today. It is an excellent staff report. I think it breaks it into priorities that are reflective of our community engagement, our community-based strategic plan, which is our guiding document, as well as long-term legacy plans that we have discussed around this table and heard a great deal about from our community. This is very much a legacy project. These are one-time funds, and we need to make sure that we invest them in a responsible and proactive and sustainable way. So while this is not a decision that comes up for very many councils, it is certainly one of the more important moving forward. And I think the roadmap we have in front of us is a good one in that it shows that we're acknowledging and putting money away where needed for debt reduction. We're strategic and updating and refilling reserves, but also looking forward to long-term projects with a degree of flexibility. And so there's some very big and important decisions, but there's also some flexibility moving forward too, I think. So with that being said, I'm going to call each item individually. And the first item is the transfer of $4 million to the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund and begin the selection of a realtor to identify properties that meet the needs of the community-based strategic plan. Already got a mover and a seconder for all these items. Are there any questions, comments on this particular item? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor of the $4 million transfer. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. The second item is the transfer of $3 million to the extension of municipal services and the enhancement of Heritage Drive, a reserve fund for that, I would imagine. And so are there any questions or comments on that item, council? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that is also carried unanimously. Thank you. Transfer of $1,024,540 to repay the outstanding amount remaining in the internal loans. Are there any questions or comments on this item, council? Seeing none, all in favor? That is also carried unanimously. The transfer of $1 million to address the shortfall of the working capital reserve fund. Any questions or comments on this item, council? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Transfer of $1 million to reserve fund established for the proposed hospital redevelopment. Councillor Jeffrey, I know you had an amendment. Would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I would, and I would like to increase it to 2 million because I do believe that we would be leaders. It's not in response to Councillor Doherty. It's not Collingwood trying to pay the whole thing. This is us trying to be responsible and having our share in place and showing the other communities within our region of what needs to be done so that we can look forward to the day that we have a very much needed hospital. I think that it will take a lot of interest on this to get to what we're going to need eventually. And I do think, like I said, showing the province we're very serious, showing the hospital we understand our responsibility in this. And we have the opportunity now, and this is truly a legacy for the largest people of our community who use the hospital. So that's my comment on the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I'm going to look for a seconder for this. Councillor Berman. Go ahead, Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just to reiterate what I think I said earlier, whether it's 80 to 100 million that we're going to need when a hospital's built, or $8 to $10 million we're going to need when a hospital's built, I don't want to pass the buck down the road to a future council. I think it's responsible that we bite off what we can now and put another $1 million in. I think that's planning for the future. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Anyone else like to comment on the amendment? Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to comment that I would support increasing, as the comments have already been made, it establishes support in general for the significance. And with that said, if passed today and passed at council in a couple of weeks, this would be the only item on this list where, and I'd be happy to provide direction at that time, I would like to see, and I think it goes to Councillor Doherty's point or observation, I'd like to see our neighboring municipalities in the province and the hospital notified that we have made this commitment so that they are aware.
Any other comments or questions, Council? I've got Councillor Madigan and then Councillor McLeod. Go ahead, Councillor Madigan.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Although I can appreciate the thought behind it, I don't think an extra $1 million is going to influence the government at all. I think they know that we want the hospital here, and I think so does the hospital. So that being said, I will be voting against it. I think it should stay in the 6.5. And then if we need it, we can move it there later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod.
I have to say that I'm torn on this one. I was all in when I first read this amendment, and given the arguments and discussions that we've had just now, I'm so withering. And so I think I will support the staff report at this time. But I think in the later conversation that we're going to have in the next little while, I am happy to revisit it. I think that I am torn.
Okay, well, when you think about that, are there any other questions or comments? Then I will go. This hospital project is absolutely a legacy project. We know that we're a growth node. We know we live in one of the fastest growing regions in the province. And this is an absolute must for our community and our region moving forward. The province needs to understand that if you're going to make us a growth node, they need to be at the table with us for infrastructure dollars to give us the infrastructure and service to support our community and our growing population. This council and the previous council have been absolutely aligned with the hospital throughout. We were the only council to pledge $150,000 to the application process. We were the only, we asked the province to grant an MZO, and we got a response from Minister Clark in 2018 indicating that they were not rejecting it, but they were merely saying it was premature and the hospital had some work to do. And we need to roll up our sleeves and stand beside our hospital to make sure that the province is aware that we as the host community are prepared to put a great deal of money into this. And we know from the county has a hospital alliance and $3 million goes into that fund annually. The last council committed to extend the 10-year program to 15 years. And of the $45 million that will be coming forward from 2018 to 2033, I think, the Hospital Alliance has committed $20 million to the Collingwood redevelopment if it proceeds as proposed. So that's 20 million plus our 2 million brings their seed money right now to 22 million, which is almost 25% of the local share. And it's our absolute hope that this project is in the ground and moving forward in 8 years. So it is a small window to generate a lot of money. And so I stand in support of this $2 million contribution because we're all hoping that this will be one of the first reserve funds that gets accessed as we move forward and we move forward with our much needed hospital redevelopment. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. Just based on comments that I've heard from a couple of my colleagues, would you please read the original staff motion again? I get the feeling that some colleagues were thinking that it was the original staff for 2 million.
The original staff suggestion was or recommendation was $1 million. Yeah. So the amendment on the table is to increase that by $1 million to $2 million. And so we're voting first on the amendment, and if that's defeated, then we'll go back to the staff recommendation. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll call the vote on the amendment for $2 million. All in favor? And I've got 5 cards opposed. And that is carried. The next item is the transfer of $885,000 to address the shortfall of the Waterfront Master Plan Reserve Fund and enable a significant waterfront project to proceed. Are there any questions or comments on this item, Council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. The next item is transfer $500,000 to address the shortfall of the Life Cycle Replacement Reserve Fund. Are there any questions or comments before I call this vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. So the next item, I will read in the original staff recommendation. And that is to allocate the remainder, approximately 6.5 million to the, well, it's 5.5 million now, sorry. We allocated an additional $1 million to the hospital. So it's to allocate the remainder, 5.5 million, to the Collingwood Legacy Fund to invest and address future projects such as the terminals redevelopment, art culture needs, and or asset management once the feasibility studies are completed. Council, are there any questions or comments on this item before I call the vote? Seeing none, I will comment just to follow up. I was very keen about the community foundation, establishing a community foundation. And as we went through the staff report and understood that the the concept more fully, I understand that it's taking money, the taxpayers' money, and putting it into a capital or a foundation fund that the capital is never accessible. It also puts a huge burden, I think, on our population to pony up in terms of growing that. And there are many demands in our community for donation dollars, and that there's a lot of competition out there. So I've come to the conclusion that a foundation is probably not feasible in the sense that it removes too much capital from our access, but also that it requires time to grow and requires significant contributions from our residents, which will also be a burden for some of our other local charities while the capital is grown in the foundation. I believe they do a lot of good, but I'm not sure it's appropriate in this circumstance. So with that being said, then I will call the vote for allocating the remaining 5.5 million to the Collingwood Legacy Fund. All in favor? I'll take that. So we've got 3 in favor. Opposed? Sorry. Councillor Dory, what are you asking?
I'm not clear. Are we voting on the amendment or are we voting on the original recommendation less than $1 million?
We're voting on the original recommendation. Councillor, it's not an amendment. We have to defeat the original recommendation to deal with it because there's components to the changes that are being proposed. So right now we're voting on allocating the remaining 5.5 million to the Collingwood Legacy Fund to invest and address future projects such as the terminal's redevelopment, art and culture needs, and or asset management once feasibility studies are completed. So I'll call the vote then. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. All right, Councillor Jeffrey, let's go through your proposed amendments one by one. The first is to transfer $1 million to the Collingwood Greening Legacy Fund. Do you want to speak first to that?
I'll speak last. It's fine.
Okay, got Councillor McLeod, then Councillor Berman, then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Jeffrey. What's a greening legacy fund? I know what all 3 words mean, but I don't know what they mean by them when they're combined.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you through you, Mayor Saunderson. It is a legacy fund being allocated to greening initiatives within, like, say something comes up within that we can do within the terminals or within the waterfront master plan or the other projects we're doing. It gets us focused on actually taking greening into consideration in many ways. There's many ways to do it, and it can be moved or used or combined, and I think that it's not limiting at all, as has been previously described by some. It's actually enhancing the desire of our residents to put focus on greening and taking our environment into the consideration in our decision making, and allowing us matching funds within the other projects to make it happen.
Does that assist, Councillor McLeod?
It sort of does. I'm cognizant of the point that Councillor Doherty made earlier, that green initiatives and that we're the type of community that has decided that we care about green initiatives and about, you know, embracing the natural environment and so on. And I wonder how this differs from having that lens on every decision that we make.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunders. I would respond to that, taking us back to when we built our Gold Lead library. There was very much a willingness to try to do something in the greening realm, but there was no way things like thermal, the thermal heating for the building, some of the big ticket items to deliver on that greening weren't available. So in the end, we got it done. And I think this allows us to apply for green municipal funding at FCM to make some of those things within our builds come to life. So they're really part of the builds we're looking at in the other legacy areas or asset management areas, but bringing focus to it. There's lots of other ways we're going to be doing this. We're going to try and do it through our OP, which will be a little slower a process, I think, but and our procurement policies and those kinds of things. But this is a legacy fund that will allow us to respect the wishes and deliver on our commitment to the environment through our builds.
Councillor McLeod.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Treasurer Quinlan, can this be done? Do we write a reserve fund with specific parameters within it?
Treasurer.
Your worship, you can, and that's basically what we've done with several of the other funds. For example, the life cycle asset management fund. But I think the reason we went and maybe we went this way with the recommendation was to provide the flexibility. But quite honestly, if it was the will of council to redirect those funds, even though they are earmarked again to that those three specific things that Councillor Jeffrey is referring to, that's a possibility as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I agree with, I think we all would, with Councillor Doherty's comment about looking at everything through this particular lens. And I think that goes for everything from the community-based strategic plan to transportation plans to the, active transportation, you name it. Supposed to look through all those lenses. So I agree with that. I think this is, I guess, through you to the CAO, first of all. If I may, where are we on the position that you're looking for a climate slash grant writing person? Because I'm wondering if this would tie in with that. Can I ask that?
Yes. Sonia?
Through the mayor, to you, Councillor Berman. Executive Director Culver and his team have finalized the job description. I'm not sure that it's been, we send it to a third party to have it assigned a level, and it will be out to the public shortly. Seek great applications. I think Executive Director Culver also circulated it to some folks like CCAT organizations, just to let them know so that they could provide any third-party comments as well. Thank you. That's
excellent. Oh, Dean's disappeared, so I guess he didn't want to say anything. So I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to put words in your mouth further to that, CAO Skinner, but I know back when you helped me and the clerk did with the wording for the climate crisis, I'm paraphrasing, so please correct me if I'm wrong. There's an awful lot that we can do. Most of it costs money. So I'm sort of looking at this as maybe addressing the potential for these projects down the road, that maybe once this person is hired, that they if they go and apply for grants where we have to have matching funds, I guess it would be how the parameters of this reserve are met, but it would prevent them having to come and ask for money from council, because there may potentially be money put aside already for this type of thing. I guess it would depend how the reserve is drawn up, but that's the way I'm seeing it. Is that maybe through you to Councillor Jeffrey, is that sort of where you were going with this?
Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, okay, so I'm totally in support of this.
Councillor, I've got you, Councillor Doherty, but first I had Councillor Hamlin. I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My problem with this is I haven't seen any demonstrated need for $1 million for this purpose. We have had $500,000 given to our town for the planting of trees, and we're barely started on that. I have, I'm aware of this, climate issue's been taken on in the county of Huron, and they're not putting great funds behind it. They're embracing in every decision that they make, I guess, as we've heard here tonight. And as Councillor Jeffrey, said, not in a derogatory sense, but the word slush fund is very much apropos this, because, $1 million with no demonstrated need, when I'm hoping, and I guess maybe, some of us are on this path at least, that if we're looking at a legacy project, which to me means infrastructure and something we'll point to me, this doesn't fall into that category, so I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. And before we start voting on these items in the amendment, through you to the CAO, once we're finished voting on these items, we have effectively cut out the terminals entirely from this $17.4 million. And I want to know where that leaves us if an opportunity presents itself, in particular, if there are matching dollars involved, either through public or private sector sources.
CAO.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty. I think that, that's a pretty obvious answer. If we do allocate, and by we, I mean you allocate the funding to other priorities, you're left really with taxes, of course, in year, I'm sure future years. You're left with debenture options. And you are left, as was mentioned once or twice earlier in this discussion, with potentially revisiting some of the reserve funds, the existing ones, or any ones you may, create subsequent to today. I think this is a very impactful set of decisions that you're going to make right now. And whatever you decide to prioritize today will be the things that staff will work hard to deliver and bring forward as priorities in the next several years. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, follow up.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so for those reasons, because these are so impactful, I will not be supporting any of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's for clarification, maybe through to the clerk. This is a committee meeting, and so we will be ratifying these decisions at council at our first meeting in April.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to comment on the Green Fund? Go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
I actually have a point of order, I think. It's a question of clarification, actually. Because we're voting on amendments, are there amendments available to these? And I guess I look to the clerk for that advice through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, and I think I'll look to Sarah, but I think we've defeated the main motion. So now these are motions that are being put on in place. So you can make an amendment to this motion that's on the floor.
Terrific, thank you.
So was that an academic question, or do you have an amendment?
No, it was an academic question on this. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure whether you want to hear a multiple item amendment, but I had actually drafted a multiple item amendment. I can read it if you like.
I want to read it in, and get a better understanding of it, and we'll decide how we go.
So the, and this is, I have to do the math on this because we've lost $1 million. But to transfer the 1 million to the Collingwood Greening Legacy would be gone. Transfer 1 million to the Collingwood Arts and Culture Legacy Fund. That leaves us with 4.5 million, if I'm doing that. Is that right?
Yes.
So transfer 2.25 million to Collingwood Multi-Use Facility Fund and transfer 2.25 million to the Terminals Redevelopment Fund.
$2.2.
Yes, 2.25.
That takes me to 5.75. I think we're starting with 5.5.
Okay, so 5.5 is 4.5. Well, that's still right.
So you've got 2 million to work from. You've got 3.5 spoken for, I think, based on what you've read in.
1 million, 1 million for Collingwood Arts and Culture.
Yeah.
2.25 for multi-use.
My mistake, sorry.
And then, yeah, and then 2.25 to terminal redevelopment.
All right, well, I think so we're dealing with, we've got a pot of 5.5 million, and we're dealing right now with a motion for 1 million to the Green Fund. So I guess I'd be looking to the clerk. These are could all be motions then that go on the floor, I guess, to how we divvy up the last 5.5.
Correct, Your Worship. I would deal with the Councillor Jeffrey's motion that's on the floor individually, and if people want to make amendments to those, they could. And then if there's money left over at the end, then Councillor Doherty could propose the terminal one. I think that was the one additional item.
And we've changed. So what we've got right now are 3 motions from Councillor Jeffrey. One is to transfer $1 million into a green fund. I gotta find my paper here now. $1.5 million to the Arts and Culture Legacy Fund, and then $3 million to the multi-use facility. And what Councillor Doherty is just tabled, although there's no seconder, is $1 million to Arts and Culture, 2.25 million to the multi-use, and 2.25 to the grain terminal. So with that being said, then I guess the first thing to do is to call the motion on the Green Fund. And then the other 2 could be amendments based on just the amounts and the amount changes, I think. So with that being said, then I will call the vote for all in favor of the $1 million transfer to, oh, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Apologies, just so I'm clear, because it'll answer the first part, the latter 2 items, arts and culture and multi-use, there's no stipulation as to what those funds could be allocated for. So if there was a period down the road where we were going to move forward with the multi-use and part of the process was to acquire land, these could be, it's a suite of money that could be allocated to the overall, correct? There's no definitive.
I see Councillor Jeffrey nodding, but I'll ask her to respond.
Yeah, I think that was the idea, is that they could be used in combination, but keep us on focus on what the people were asking us to do and have those priorities front and center with money behind them for matching dollars or whatever.
Okay. That's all. I just wanted to be 100% clear. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. So then what we're calling now is the vote on the $1 million to the Collingwood Greening Legacy Fund. All those in favor? One, two, three, four. And opposed? Duly noted. And then we have transferred $1.5 million to the Collingwood Arts and Culture Legacy Fund. Now, Councillor Doherty, you had talked about an amendment. Well, What's on the table is 1.5 million to the Arts and Culture Legacy Fund. And Councillor Doherty, this is now a main motion. So if you wanted to put an amendment on the table to amend that amount to $1 million, this is your opportunity to do that.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I propose to amend that to 1 million to the Collingwood Art and Culture Legacy Fund.
All right, and is there a seconder? Okay, Councillor McLeod has seconded it. So it is on the floor. Do we have questions or comments on this? All right, seeing none, then we'll call the vote. Then go ahead, Councillor Hammond.
My question is through you, Mr. Mayor. What is a art and culture legacy fund?
I think that's a capital fund for any development that may come forward for the Arts and Culture Center arising out of the feasibility study. I'll look to Councillor Jeffrey though.
That's correct. It's the same concept as what the greening one was. It's an opportunity to flex it within maybe combination of projects, but a capital assistance going forward that helps us with art and culture.
So just as a follow-up, so these are for capital infrastructure works only, not to send, I don't know, a band to Russia if they got a good opportunity. So, and how would we, and maybe this is a question for staff, will we see some outline of exactly a definition for this fund if this is supported by council today? When would we see that?
Treasurer Quinlan.
Worship, thank you. I suppose we could, once we have sort of all the information required, we could bring a report back that shows exactly the requirements of each fund and how that should or shouldn't be spent. Does that make sense, or does that satisfy that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, thank you. That was my question.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? This is the amendment we're voting on to transfer $1 million to the Collingwood Art and Cultural Legacy Fund. And so with that being said, I'll call the vote. All in favor? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that amendment is defeated. So calling the vote then on the $1.5 million to the Arts and Culture Legacy Fund. All in favor? And opposed? Duly noted, and that is carried. And the next item is transfer $3 million to the Collingwood multi-use facility. And I see Councillor McLeod. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have an amendment to this, and I'd like to say that we have $2 million to the multi-use facility fund and $1 million to be dedicated to terminal work.
Okay, got an amendment on the floor. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Madigan. Any comments or on this amendment? Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin, and then Councillor Doherty.
We sort of, I appreciate all of this discussion because we have so many needs in our community. There are so many groups that would like to have things done. And I just wanted to say again, I'm really disappointed that we won't have the opportunity to have one big project that we can say, this is our once in a lifetime legacy project out of these funds. And the more we divide this up into little bits, they're going to fit on a balance sheet, the less opportunity we have to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
I'm looking for my card, sorry. I will support this amendment. Actually, I'll suggest a friendly amendment to this amendment, if I may, and that would be to split the allocation equally between the two. So now I need my socks and shoes off to add up past 10. So help me out here. So that would be 1.5 and 1.5.
Yes.
Thank
I'll look to the mover.
No, I'm happy with where it is. Thank you.
Okay.
Trying to be balanced and reasonable and friendly.
So we've got this amendment on the floor, and if this gets defeated, Councillor Doherty, then I'll look to you for a further amendment. Any other comments or questions, Council? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I think that this is a wonderful problem that this council has to deal with, or committee, and council have to deal with it in a couple of weeks. I don't disagree that it'd be nice to have some monies for the terminals, but I also can think of probably another 10 things that I'd like to set money aside for as well. But I do think that the monies that are being set aside for the infrastructure as it relates to Heritage Drive are and have been identified as one of the key setbacks to any development as it relates to that particular site. I mean, there are a whole host of other things that need to be addressed as it relates to the buildings themselves, the land on the north side, et cetera. But really not having sewer and water has been made a major setback for years for a whole host of reasons. Councillor McLeod, I share your concern as it relates to the porta potties. I hope staff are listening. Perhaps there's a naming right there for you if you would like to donate to some type of investment for a porta potty. But because it's, quite frankly, it's an embarrassment. And I would suggest, and I mentioned it, I think, when we were talking about Fisher Field, that I think that probably if we had put it out to the public, although Fisher Field is a well-used park, from a beautification, from a use, from how we present ourselves to the world, quite frankly, I think that investing in Heritage Drive and in the infrastructure is number one. So when we talk about the terminals, I think that we are doing that. And so when this amendment came forward, I fully understand and I appreciate the complexities and trying to parse it out. But I think having an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to the environment, to a potential arts and culture facility, again, something that's been discussed for 30 years. And coincidentally, it's Barb Wider's birthday today. She probably would have a vote, and her vote would be for an arts and culture facility. And I think the multi-use is something that not only has been identified, but because through past actions is something that still has to be remediated. And what's clear is that, one, the facilities that we have are costing us too much, and two, that they don't necessarily meet the existing demands that the community has as it relates to recreation. And I'm not talking about hockey. I'm talking about all of the other missed opportunities that came with not going with a true multi-use. Things like an indoor walking trail for our aging population, or those who are maybe coming back from some type of health-related issue. Those are the fundamentals that we missed with the multi-use, not hockey. So I think we can debate this all day, but I think that the motion that was put on the table as it relates to these three subsets demonstrates to the community that we're making a commitment. It's a broad commitment, and in a sense is laying a foundation for a legacy. Some of the things that we have today in our community, for example, the Arboretum, which was a former waste dump. I would suspect that there's not many people, if anyone, who's alive when that decision was made. That's a legacy. Nobody knows about it. But at some point, there was a commitment made by a previous council to purchase lands, to move forward with rehabilitation. And what a wonderful legacy that is. And there's not even a plaque to denote that that decision was made by a future body or a past body and the legacy that they created. So I appreciate the debate today because it's a great one. Isn't it a fun conversation to have on how to potentially, divvy out money and create these opportunities? And who knows, over the next couple of weeks, we may flesh this out a little bit more in our own minds and come back. But I think in the spirit today of moving forward, what's presented does create an opportunity, and I'd like to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other questions or comments, Council? Council Berman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Yeah, just to agree with two things, or piggyback on two things the Deputy Mayor said. I assumed, and going back to the public comments in 2013, that Heritage Drive was sort of considered a necessity to do anything with the terminals. So I've personally been looking at that as $3 million towards getting out to that project. And also to what the Deputy Mayor said, as far as legacies being down the road, I think what we are doing here is all to do with legacy. I personally don't care if my name's on the plaque or not. I care that when my kid comes back to the town to show it to her kids, that she sees what we have here. The point that I wanted to make, and I understand the importance to Councillor Doherty, but my feeling is also we've looked after it already. We probably all remember the all candidates meeting at the Legion that we had for the council members, and John Eaton, I think it was, that pulled a random question out of a bowl for us. And mine was a moment of levity because he said, what would you do if the town came into a whole bunch of money? What would you do about a multi-use rec facility? We don't have enough money to build one right now, but much like the other projects we talked about, we got to start somewhere. We know we're going to need one. So why pass that burden off to the next council or the council after that? Let's put the money there now because we know it's a target. We don't know what the target on the terminals is, especially until the P3 gets out and we see what's what. So I'm in favor of this as well. I think it's just, as the treasurer backed up, are we putting $200 in one envelope and $100 in another envelope? It's semantics. I can see the multi-use rec facility in the site. So I would be in favor of it the way that it is.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Any other comments, Council? I have a question, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Hamlin. Just reading the report, my understanding is that we've topped up the waterfront master plan reserve, so there will now be a balance of $3 million in the waterfront master plan reserve.
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. And the work that we're doing this year on the water feature, the Thunderbird water feature at Harborview Park, that's already in the budget. So does that take any money out of the reserve?
I'd have to look into that, to be perfectly honest, unless, nope, there you go.
Through Your Worship, it was actually covered by development charges in the non-DC reserve. It was identified in the development charge study.
Okay, so I take from that the reserve the $3 million reserve won't be impacted by the waterfront development down in Harborview Park, at least not the water feature phase this year. Okay, and so because the terminals are on the spit, when we talk about waterfront master plan, does that at all encompass the terminals work? Go ahead, CEO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you, and then we'll see if Executive Director Culver has more. At the time when the report was done, as I've been briefed by Executive Director Culver, we'd really drawn a box around the terminals themselves to say that there were things that should happen, on the spit, but the future aspirations for the terminals within their footprint wasn't included in that original report. So the original cost estimates, for example, wouldn't have included changes to the terminals themselves. But nonetheless, I think it is council who's approving the scopes of these reserve funds, and Treasurer Quinlan's already talked about coming back to you to confirm scopes in more detail. So I think that there is some space there for council to indicate its intentions.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have Councillor Hamlin and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I am very much in favor of a, multi-use community center in Collingwood. It's one of those things, every time I go to Owen Sound, I drool because theirs is so amazing. But when I look at $3 million, I'm thinking like that's a drop in the bucket, much like the hospital fund. I'm sorry, my questions are, and I don't know who can answer this, but like, where would this go and how much would it be and when would this happen?
Relating to the multi-use facility?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll put that through. I know there was talk in the Parks and Rec master plan about potential timing of discussions and what that could look like. So I'll pass that through to Executive Director Culver.
Thank you, Worship. So at this point, the only outlook we have via the Parks and Rec PRC master plan is for a feasibility study to commence ideally next year, pending council support of budget. At that point, it will determine sort of what the future needs, the present and future needs would be from a multi-use rec facility. And that's sort of the nature of that particular feasibility assessment. And then from there, that would help us to constitute a plan of costs and funds needed, et cetera. It's sort of the first step would be hopefully kicked off next year.
Thank you. Follow-up, Councillor Hammond?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Worship. I will just make it clear that I am supporting the amended motion. I also agree that it is important for us to start setting monies aside for a multi-use facility and recognizing that in the immediate terms is not enough, but it is a start and well invested will grow hopefully to a fairly significant proportion of the cost by the time we need it. But I also, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it is important for us to have monies earmarked for the terminals, whether our RFP comes back in support of redevelopment or whether it comes back in with a recommendation to bring them down. But the servicing of the spit must happen regardless. So it seems to me that those two items are separate. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're voting on now, Council, is taking $2 million for the reserve fund for the multi-use facility and $1 million for the reserve fund for the terminal. So that's the amended motion on the floor. And we've had good discussion. So I'm going to call the vote then. All in favor? And opposed? So that is defeated. And that brings us back to the original motion of $3 million to the multi-use fund. We've had good discussion, so I'm just going to call the vote on that then. All in favor? And opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Good discussion on that, and that will be coming back before council in our first meeting in April. And that brings us then to item 5.3, CAO 2021-3, operational planning process and 2021 operational plan. And I will pass it over to CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, that was a pretty profound discussion. We'll be certainly working hard on putting those votes into action. And speaking of putting things into action, we did do a little bit of a change this year. We hope to better support council and also better support staff. And that is putting a more formalized operational planning process into play. And if you could please go to slide 2. So our purpose in just doing this brief update today, or depending on the number of questions you have, I think brief, is to show you what we've put into place. And we wanted to do that so that council members and even the public can better assess that council's resolutions are being actioned. And but we will maintain the independence of staff to determine how to deliver the key work under the resources and priorities that are provided by council. And I know that council will remember, but the public may or may not fully understand the difference between the roles of council and the roles of staff. And so the council's roles are set out in the Municipal Act, and they include representing constituents, making policies, stewarding the municipality's resources, and other statutory things like looking after our drinking water system, etc. And our role as staff is, of course, to implement council's decisions, administrative practices, advice to council after good research, and things like that. And so if you go to the next slide, please. This is continuous improvement. I don't want anybody in the public or staff or council to think that we didn't have operational planning in place to some extent before. So we've had a pending list of council resolutions that showed which ones council had made and were still being actioned. And each year we have an approved budget, just like this year, and it talks about our capital work and our other priorities. But it is 200 pages of text. So if you're a council member and you're concentrating on that, you probably have a really great idea of what's in it. But we couldn't update it quickly. We couldn't share our progress easily. And it wasn't hard. It was hard to see all the work. So what we've done this year is we've put together everything that's a council resolution, anything that has a significant mention in the budget, everything that we think needs to go to council for a decision or as a project. So that means something that has a start and end date that as a rule of thumb is roughly 3 person weeks of time or more, and put it in this operational plan. Notably, this doesn't include everything for the delivery of our ongoing services. So there's many, many, many things that were in the 73 or so services that are available to the public from the town that aren't mentioned here that we do every day. We provide swim lessons, we plow the roads. There's lots of things going on in the background. The next slide talks about the benefits. Why did we put in this continuous improvement? We wanted to coordinate our work better. We specifically wanted to make sure that things that are going through a centralized department, so for example, procurement or a fleet and facilities or an information technology group would be able to service all the departments well. I know that before I was personally hired, council during this term approved a restructuring that invested in some corporate services and public service. So this is just the next step on that, making sure that we can coordinate well across departments. We talked about consistency in dates, a single authoritative set of information, better planning of upcoming public agendas. We have a better understanding of what needs to get to council and the lead time to do that. And my last point, which I think is important, is maybe a little less time talking about the status for things going well without losing credit for delivering them. So we'll be able to report to you and the public a little more in a streamlined way. On the next slide, the number and types of items that are included. So if one looked on iCompass on the our town website at this report, you'd see there was an attachment with the operational plan as it was captured just a couple of days ago when we posted the report. And there was 373 items on that list. And not all of them, of course, should be visible to council or are things that the public would care about. But we wanted you to have just a little bit of an anchor so that you could understand, what's happening with the resources that people invest in through their taxes. And there are a number of items that we thought, notwithstanding, there's a long list behind that, but we want to make sure council is updated on and has an ongoing direct interest in. So I've suggested a few here on slide 5, many of which you just talked about. The grain terminals RFP for redevelopment, including the potential for a P3 and a consultant to support us. Delivery of the official plan update to the county. Managing the next steps of the judicial inquiry under the oversight of council. Delivering our community safety and well-being plan in collaboration with our police services board, and our adjacent municipalities. Delivering a plan for our core assets this year. There was, you would notice in the consent agenda today, a delay by the province allowing us more time to finish this. But we're very committed to getting the numbers before you this year because we think it will affect our future budgets and also our long-term capital needs. And those core assets are the ones we spend the most money on. Water supply and pipeline agreements with the new Tecumseh. Our water treatment plant expansion, making sure that's designed. And actually, we won't get to the tender of the expansion. Just to be clear, that's the tender of the design so that we can get that well underway. Hiring our climate change specialist and getting him or her started on the new fund we've just potentially will have created today, pending council's second vote in a couple of weeks. Proceeding at all haste with diversity and inclusion. And of course, the asset sale proceeds that we discussed today overall. On the next slide, please. I didn't want to leave you, however, without a little bit of a caution. This is a continuous improvement for us. We're learning how to do it. We're learning how to update it. It's not meant to be a set of impossible goals, but a way to have a conversation about what is most important. And we didn't think we'd make it perfect the first time through because there's always a bit of risk in trying something new. I think that if we got to 80% of the 300 and something items on that list, we would have had an exceptional year, particularly given COVID. So I just wanted to set expectations for you and the public appropriately. And the last slide before the recommended motion is I just wanted to leave you with a little bit of a visual for maybe how these things fit together into a more of a framework. So council provides a budget, so that's the bottom slice. And based on that budget, we have an operational plan that details the work. We have individuals deliver that work. I keep moving up this triangle. Through that individual's work, all the town programs and services are delivered. And also while delivering those, we focus particularly on the strategic transformations that you've set out through the community-based strategic plan. Because of course the strategic plan doesn't cover everything. It's just those items that we have specifically focused on for transformation. And that I hope will help us achieve your vision of the Live More Now. So in conclusion, the recommended motions on the final slide, which is that you receive this staff report on the process and the actual plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonia. I'll look to the clerk to see if we have anyone in the gallery that would like to speak to this report.
Thank you, Your Worship. We still have attendees. So if you wish to speak to council, please press the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you. Should you wish to address this staff report? Your Worship, there is no interest at this point to speak to this item on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So the recommendation is that staff report CAO 2021-3 operational planning process and 2021 operational plan be received. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Madigan, seconded by Councillor Jeffrey. Council, questions or comments on the operational plan? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the CAO. My first question, so this work plan incorporates all of the items that we had included in our previous work plan before we had formatted in this manner, in an operational plan. We had last year, at the end of the year, we had a list of items, pending items and projects. So we've incorporated that with these operational items that came out of the operations review. Is that correct?
Sonia, go ahead.
If I'm explaining myself.
Yes, I think that you are, through the mayor, The last time that we published a full list of the pending items council had voted on, it was at the beginning of the budgeting process last year at the end of 2020. All the items that were in that list, other than the ones that have been completed in 2020, should be in the operational plan. If there's one you think is missing, I'd be happy to look into it, but we pulled everything across to be scheduled or actioned.
Follow-up, Councillor Doty?
Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, there was one item, and that was to begin the implementation of the urban canopy strategy, and more specifically, the private tree bylaw. Now, it may be in there, but I couldn't find it.
I do believe that it is in there, and I just have to do a short word search to find it. I think it's at the end in the 2022 proposal. There's a little bit of a different color at the very end. There's 3 or 4 lines in the Appendix A to the report would be my...
Okay, you know what, rather than holding up council, I'll have another look at it myself. And if it's not there, we can make that amendment. The other item, and then just again going back to green initiatives and our declaration of a climate crisis, there's a number of references to acquisition of vehicles as an example, and acquisition of buses. There's also a reference to that project. Included in that activity, are we looking for alternative to fossil fuel powered vehicles?
Tanya.
Through the mayor, one thing I just realized, and actually with the help of Director Slama, that the private tree bylaw implementation was a budget decision to be deferred to 2022, if you'll recall. So it is set.
Yeah, I do recall that. Yeah.
And I know that Directors Culver and a few others have been working on the, Director Slama had been working on the greening of the fleet. So I'd like to ask them to maybe speak briefly to your question about green acquisitions, please.
And if I may expand that, I guess generally, as we look at capital improvements or capital investments, are we beginning to look at these things with a green lens? So we're looking at some major improvements to our 10th Street, 10th line facilities. This may be an opportunity for us to install alternatives to traditional heating and cooling facilities, as an example, or installation of fit technologies, etc.
Thank you. Who wants to, Executive Director Culver, you can start.
This was the not it sign. This was, but anyway, I'll go, it's fine. Thank you, Worship. So with respect to the truck fleet, the vehicles used for utility purposes, yeah, we've implemented new criteria policy around the acquisition of vehicles that includes green options. And I think Council hopefully remember that the last run of fleet vehicles included many electric vehicles, and we're going to continue in that direction. In terms of facilities and implementing green effects, yep, that's one of the criteria. As recent as a conversation this past week with the fleet and facilities team, talking about expansion or the need to establish something on 10th line for utilities. Yeah, we understood that one of the criteria is how to be as green as possible within those builds, and also with recent funding that we've been reviewing as possible, we've also taken a look at green opportunities. So the green lens is firmly in place in terms of all of our outlooks for capital asset.
Thank you. And it's good to see, we'll just add this, that all these initiatives are being undertaken without benefiting of an additional budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, just to support what Executive Director Culver mentioned, yeah, as well as what's being looked at are, considerations for fleet and facilities, certainly in when we're looking at upgrades at our water and wastewater treatment plant, we know that, outside of labor, our utility fees are the highest component of those processes. So we're always looking for ways that we can improve our processes with, equipment. And certainly that's also the way the industry is going as well, and reduce our utility costs. And we certainly understand the interest of council and residents of Collingwood when it comes to exploring the opportunities for electrical fleet for our transit. So that's something we're, always learning about and trying to understand, when it would be a good time for Collingwood to go in that direction with our new fleets.
Any follow-up, Councillor Doherty?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Okay. Council, any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, through you to the CAO and staff. When I did a quick scan, the word sunset came up 12 times throughout the report, but I think it was maybe 4 different items. And the one that I'd like to just ask about is specific to number 94. And it looks like a report will be coming back at the end of Q2. And I'm assuming, one, that report is a proactive response to what transpired last year and in previous years, as growth and demand for water becomes paramount, but 2, because of the pressures that COVID has presented. Is that correct?
I'm on mute. CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, Executive Director Culver will provide a bit of an update. And in fact, we had planned one for the departmental updates exactly along those lines. I think he might be off for a second, but in number 6, with the chair's okay, we'll provide some details there. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Dean. I know there was some email correspondence today on this.
I have to admit, I'm really, really sorry, but I got distracted and so I missed the question. So I need a little help catching up. Sorry.
Question is about the update for measures to be put in place at Sunset Point for increased crowds this summer.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and my apologies again. So we have the plan in place as it currently sits is for us to bring a report, finish reviewing the bylaw that was, I think, last updated in 1987 or 89, the parks bylaw. So right now that's with senior management for review. The next step is it will head out to the public for an engagement process to have them review the changes and to get any commentary or feedback that they have on the proposed changes. We'll do a report incorporating those and then bring that to council. I think May 3rd is the meeting date for the Corporate Community Services Standing Committee. Alongside that, I do believe parking, the bylaw department is also putting together a new parking bylaw, and we'll have that. It's in process right now, I believe, going through department heads this week, and so it'll be heading to council sometime in the near future in order to gain your approval for changes that will have an effect on Sunset Point as well. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Dean, follow up, Deputy Mayor.
I use the word Sunset Point, but really it's the waterfront as a whole, because we had issues throughout the community in terms of access. And I guess what I'm maybe inquiring or questioning today is that as staff is looking at the issues, as staff are looking at maybe what recommendations to be brought forward, it's a question, comment, take it for which way you want. Is there any consultation that's being done with our neighbors to the east in Wasaga Beach, neighbors to the west in Town of Blue Mountains, the possibility of streamlining to ensure that maybe some of our policies are akin to one another. And the reason I suggest that is that oftentimes a visitor to the area is maybe not as familiar with the geopolitical boundaries as we are. And I would think that if we had some policies that were streamlined, it would be beneficial for our staff from an enforcement standpoint. It would be beneficial from those who are visiting because we'd have consistent policies. So just food for thought. And I wonder, and where this is coming from is I was a little surprised, and I'm not offering comment on it, but I was a little surprised if anybody else saw it, but City of Barrie is in the process of considering a report as it relates to their waterfront. And it's quite restrictive in its use. And so I don't want to comment one way or the other, perhaps I already have. But I also wonder if there should be consideration or discussion at a much more regional and even a provincial level, and whether or not there should be a discussion or even an inquiry with the province that, the province has established through the park system, through the provincial park system, consistency. So somebody who is visiting, say, Wasaga Beach, Craigleith, Sauble Beach, Grand Bend at Pinery, they adhere to some consistent policies, and therefore the visitors who are going to those waterfront parks know the expectations, they know the rules and regulations, etc. And I think that as the pressures, we can't build more waterfront, and therefore the pressures, beyond this summer are going to magnify. And it would be interesting to have, a much more regional discussion about creating consistent policies so that there's a broader understanding of what the expectations are, both from our own residents, from an enforcement standpoint, but those who are visiting and for all who are enjoying the waterfront. So food for thought.
Thank you. Executive Director.
Yeah, I want to just mention, if I could, Your Worship, that I do appreciate the Deputy Mayor's thoughts and comments. I think that it's a really smart approach for us to continue to try and have broader strategic conversations within our South Georgian Bay region, especially. I will say, though, and I think it's probably important for Council to know, that staff have been, for lack of a better phrasing, overwhelmed by our local context in dealing with some of the issues that have emerged rapidly along our waterfront. So while we have good relationships with our neighbors, and I totally appreciate and agree with the Deputy Mayor's comments, our focus has been trying to figure out how to do things within our own specific context. And I think there is definitely an appropriate time for us to look at a regional overlay that says, how can we do things that are more synergistic? So totally agree. I don't want to say I don't disagree at all. I think it's a really smart approach, but I think it might be the place and time that we're at now is to get implementation of policies that manage our current context.
Thank you. CEO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you also to Deputy Mayor Hull. I think that Executive Director Culver may be underselling the fact that he met with Town of Blue Mountains and Meaford and a number of other municipalities weekly all last summer to sort of try and manage how we would approach the COVID challenges. So I don't know if we've done as good a job, maybe we have, reaching out on the Wasaga side. So point taken, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any further questions or comments? Council Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a follow-up to Deputy Hull's, Mayor Hull's point, which I agree with, particularly on, I'll just add one thing on the question of what we charge for parking. It would be great if there was some thought whether coordination was needed. I've heard that for those who shop for the cheapest parking available, the Wasaga Beach Provincial Park is relatively expensive, and that people were driving to Collingwood because of it's relatively inexpensive by comparison. So there may be advantages to making sure we're as coordinated as possible, so that for obvious reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions, council? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. So item 6 is departmental updates, and I don't see any. And this brings us to item 7, which is public delegations. Sarah, do we have anyone in our gallery who would like to address council on an issue?
Thank you, Your Worship. If any of our attendees wish to present to Strategic Initiative Committee, please press the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you. There's no interest at this time, Your Worship.
All right, and then the next item is item 8 to go in camera. Councillor Hamlin.
Under departmental updates, Mr. Mayor, I had one question. I had received some inquiries over the weekend about the possibility, and this is a question for Director Culver, about whether we have the possibility in town to plant native wildflowers in our boulevards to prevent, well, to, you know, beautify our town, and also there would be an advantage to the cost of mowing and so on. And so I'm just wondering if Director Culver could address that. Thank you.
Dean?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So we've recently, as everyone's aware, we're fully partnered with Pollinate Collingwood and their recent success in helping us to gain B City status. And so we will have, we'll be moving towards a larger strategic plan for pollination and pollinators across the community. Boulevards are a particularly challenging area to grow anything in, truthfully. In our situation, we have pretty heavy salt and sand loads that, depending on the location, will have a negative impact and toxify the soil. So we don't, it doesn't grow well. And as council's also aware, with respect to Pretty River Parkway specifically, we have some very significant concerns around health and safety when trying to manage that property. So we'll move forward and definitely consult with Pollinate Collingwood to see where those opportunities are. I had a conversation with Jessica Lair today about boulevards specifically and how it fits into a longer term strategic plan. So so we'll look forward to that, but that's probably the best answer I can give at this time.
Thanks, Dean.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much.
All right, council. So that brings us to item 8.1. Whereas the clerk hereby concurs the reasons for the in-camera session have been duly reviewed and considered, and the matters are authorized under the exception provisions to conduct a closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act prior to proceeding into closed session. Therefore, be it resolved that this standing committee proceeds in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to 1, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including town or local board employees, item A, and 2, labor relations or employee negotiations, which is also item A, and the item for discussion is CAO performance plan. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? It's moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Jeffrey. Any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. My understanding, council, is because of the format of this meeting, we need to check out of this meeting to go to a separate link to go in camera. And then we will be coming back out to this session to rise and report. So it's now 4:29, and we will meet, give a 5-minute break, file break. So we'll be back here at 5:25 to 5, please.
Excuse me, Your Worship, you should be live.
Thank you, Chris. All right, council will need a resolution to rise from in camera and return to open session. So the motion will read that council will rise from in camera and return to open session at 4:44 p.m. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Doherty and Councillor McLeod, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And so by way of rise and report from in camera, we were dealing with the work plan for council and CAO for the upcoming year. And as was indicated in the operational review at page, I think 5 of 5, our priorities are the Collingwood grain terminals, the RFP for redevelopment, the official plan update, the judicial inquiry next steps, manage and follow up, and 1-year report back, delivering community safety and well-being plan, asset management, deliver plan for core assets, water supply and pipeline agreements with the town of New Tecumseh, water treatment plant expansion, the design and tender, excuse me, of the expansion plans. The tender relates to the plans, and hire a climate control change specialist, the diversity and inclusion file, moving that forward, and the asset sale proceeds, which we've discussed at length today. So that was the substance of the discussion. And that now brings us to our last item on the agenda, which is the adjournment. So I'll look to Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. That was a good meeting. And we'll see the corporate and community services gang in 15 minutes.